Hello, my friends.
Hi.
We thought that we had started, so I was like trying to be all cute and sassy, and it was awkward. I was just like, oops, we're not live, my bad.
Well, we've all had a false start or two in our life.
Literal story of my life. Oh my goodness. Welcome everyone to episode number 62 of Restitching the Tapestry. My name is Donny Winter and I am joined by my dear friends and co-hosts Ari Whipple from the channel Strange Nothings and Sherri Archer from the channel Sherri Makes Stuff. So welcome to both of you. It's great to be back here. And we have some people tuning in already. Leo says that super excited, loves the show's opening. Thanks. We love it too. Panda Alsatians here as well. Awesome. So, obviously, before we get started talking about our stuff, let's share what we've been up to and how we've been doing lately. So, what have you guys been up to? How have things been going? Sherri, do you want to go first?
Well, Sherri's been sick, so Sherri's got her sexy whiskey voice going on. That's
Oh.
Kathleen Turner impression. And I got you to snort. So other than that, that's literally all I've been doing. I was telling my partner he's been sick too. It's not COVID, so it's just a cold. We both got tested. It's just a cold. But it's literally just been wake up, have breakfast, nap, get up, have some lunch, nap, let the dog out, nap. That's kind of been our life. So that's been my exciting life. How about
Napping
you?
sounds amazing. Although I am glad that you're on the mend. That is good. That is good. Ari, what have you been up to?
Well, I got my booster shot on Monday. I think it was the 10th, and so I've been sleeping a lot too. I just wake up and I go, "Oh, you know what it is? It's time for nap." Even though I slept 8 hours, I'm like, time. I'll feed my cat and then time for nap. But I was coming out of it the last like this today was like the first day that I really felt like myself again. So I was doing some writing. I wrote my 6 poems, and then I'm working on a screenplay. It may be for grad school. I'm thinking about going back to grad school. So I have to write a screenplay as part of my portfolio. But I don't know if I'm going to go because I have to ask about money. But that's something for another day.
That's exciting, though.
That is
Like,
exciting.
wow. Well, I know filmmaking has been something that you've been really passionate about, and that would be really cool to see you fully immerse yourself in that creative outlet, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So for me, I've been, of course, this was the first week of the semester, so I've been like schooling it up, you know. But beyond that, we had a COVID scare at my house, but everybody tested negative. Everything seems to be fine. We're good. Although I've been kind of having an existential crisis lately because a lot of people I know have been getting COVID. So it's been like, yeah, it's been hitting really close to home, like repeatedly. And I don't know, like it's just this reminder that we're definitely not out of the woods yet by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I've been trying to organize myself. This, like, the first week of school is normally like obviously like getting stuff situated. I've been working on like my creative writing schedule where I have like some readings that I'm going to be doing. And Ari's going to be doing a couple of those readings with me as well. So if you're interested in attending any of our readings, if you visit my website, donnywinter.com, you will see a listing of like some of those events. So, but beyond that, here we are, right? Leo says started a D&D campaign yesterday. Oh. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm excited that you started up one of those D&D campaigns. That's fun. All right, so before we get started talking about our topic tonight, I'm going to go through and read our show's mission statement per the usual.
It's pretty new.
It's a new one. I decided, like, we all decided to collaborate and revise it. We live in a dynamic society where social media shapes us by creating greater opportunities for connection. It has led to a developing understanding of the adversity many marginalized communities face, the powers causing the adversity, and those who act as bystanders as atrocities take place in real time. Our goal with the show is to make connections and have challenging conversations about social topics, current events, pop culture, and art. Together, let's weave the threads of understanding with what privilege we have in order to learn, educate, and create in a world that's growing. And somehow I did not stumble over that. So, woo, I was a little worried. Okay, so there have been instances in prior episodes, largely in season 1 of the show, especially, where we talked about representation here and there. There's been like a peppering of it, but it's usually been in like a larger context connected to some other topic. So we wanted to take an episode and dedicate it 100% to talking about LGBTQ plus representation in the media and why it's so important, right? So I guess the thing that we should think about first is like a little bit of the history of representation. Let's talk about where representation has gone wrong.
Oh.
I feel like I guess I'll preface it by saying giving the reason why representation is so important, because it's because people need to be able to see themselves in positions, in places, in environments where they are succeeding, where they are existing, where they are making some sort of difference, right? So being able to see that is so important because it helps empower. Are there any other benefits to representation that either of you can think of that's far more articulate than what I just said?
Well, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ari. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Sherri.
I'm still formulating what I want to say, so we'll chew on it a little bit.
Okay, so basically, like I didn't. I would kind of zoned out for a second, so I don't know exactly what you said. I'm sorry, but from what I understand, representation is good because it lets people. It's kind of like the days of Star Trek when you would see like a diversity of characters, like all people from different walks of life, like they didn't show a lot of Black people in television unless they were entertainers, like musicians, and they definitely didn't put Black women in the spotlight, and they did that with Star Trek, and it was like you could see somebody who looked like you on the screen, or somebody who was like you on the screen, and so it's like it's a sort of validation when you, from what I've heard people talk about, and like for me, seeing in the modern age, seeing bisexual characters and trans characters, it's a little affirming that like that people of these communities are getting represented more, and that it's like kind of like not marginalizing them or othering them. It's making them part of the stories in an intricate, like developed way.
Right, agreed.
Yeah, and I want to take a step back because you started off your sentence or your question for us, Donny, with can you think of times when it was done badly or when it was done wrong? And I think we also need to take a look at that because we have to look at it in context and the time in which the media was made as well. Because we live in a time now that's more accepting than it ever has been before. 20 years ago, the same thing could be said. 20 years before that, the same thing could be said. Now we look at media from 20 years ago and we go, yeesh, right? Like, no way could that media be made now. Like, that's so insensitive. But at the time, it was very forward thinking and it was good representation for its time. Do you see what I'm saying? So,
oh yeah, 100%.
So you can't look at it in a vacuum. I mean, you can look at it, but you can't look at it in a vacuum. You can't judge a piece of media based on the time in which you live in. You have not just, you can of course use it in that filter, but I think it's insincere to look at it just through that filter. It's not taking into account the positive impact that that character may have had on
Mm.
a person of the time. You think of like Paul Lynde, who was the quirky character, and he was a gay man, but he was a very closeted gay man, a very poorly closeted gay man, right, in the 60s and 70s. But he never openly admitted to being gay, and he never lived an open gay lifestyle.
Mhm.
And he played this series after series of heterosexual put upon father figures. And for the audience's standpoint, that was always part of the joke, was like, he's clearly not a heterosexual man and he's playing these characters, or at least from the audience that I was a part of the LGBT crowd, right? That was part of the joke, was it was almost like an inside joke that we had with Paul Lynde. Like, clearly you're a gay man and you're just going through these ministrations, like the ministrations that we're all going through, having to be closeted. You know what I mean? So it almost became a parody of what was going through it. So if you look at it just from a singular standpoint, you say, oh, how sad was that Paul Lynde wasn't able to live this lifestyle, that he wasn't able to be open, that all these things didn't happen for him. While that some of that is true, yes, also at the same time, some of that was his choice, because he did live post the Stonewall era, and there were a lot of gay men coming out during his time. He just chose not to for his own reasons, so
Mhm.
that it's all valid, whatever his reasons were. And you have to look at it like he was still a positive influence to the LGBTQ crowd, because he was still gay representation. And it was still a positive, his characters were always very positive. He was always a very positive person, a very upbeat, funny person. And it was never kind of, he was never punching down, and he was never like, poking fun at anybody or anything. He just played these silly, quirky characters, and they were just fun to watch, and they were full of life, and they were full of fun. And so, it could be questioned and it could be said, well, that's done poorly, but is it, right? Like, taken in context, it's not necessarily so.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned lenses. Like, I think, like, applying historical context to things like this is extremely important, and I think that's important in any type of media outlet or art form, right? Like, even in poetry, like, we look back at like poems, like pre-contemporary poems, and we're like, okay, well, why was this written the way it was written? Why was this being conveyed the way it was conveyed? Let's think historical context first, and why that might have been significant at that time. So, like, at that time, like, I think it's important, like you were saying, to think about, like, we may not be aware of it, but it probably was making a difference, right?
Mhm,
And that's significant to recollect on and think about.
mhm.
So, to answer Leo's question, by the way, I think we're largely focusing on visual media right now, but I do think that it could apply to all forms of media.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're talking mostly about TV and movies, aren't we?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Deborah's here and Sophia's here. Yay! It's great to see you both. So now, like, I'm gonna think about, like, I think there are certain eras when people knew better than to kind of like adopt these tropes, right? That we're going to talk about here in a second. Like, for example, the barrier dead gays trope, or the dead lesbian syndrome trope. I'm going to actually hate on one of my favorite shows for a moment. I love this show dearly, but Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Have either of you watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
A little bit.
I
Little
have
bit.
not, but I'm aware of the show.
Right. I apologize if I spoil anything, but there is a character who ends up coming out as bisexual, like, kind of like midway through the show. The show's like 7 seasons. She ends up getting in a relationship, a same-sex relationship with another woman, and this relationship's like developed for like 3 seasons actually. So like people were very invested in it. In the early 2000s, it was considered like absolutely groundbreaking. Like, at that point in time, there had been some LGBTQ plus characters, but like in fantasy especially, like, it was groundbreaking. Well, they ended up killing off this character as a motivation for the, you know, lover character to kind of like go into like this dark spiral, and it kind of like set in motion like this recurrence of like, oh well, these two gays are together, that means something bad's gonna happen.
It's like dun dun dun, they're gay.
And it happened like I think that it's something that happened a lot in like the 2000s decade. Now I will say, I still think that the representation in the show was monumental and did so many great things. But I do know that so many people were angry because it kind of seemed like erasure of sorts. Like if there was like some sort of like reason behind the death, that would have been more poignant, but this character was almost killed off for no reason. Like there was like no purpose to it.
Did you say the other one ended up a little bit crazy too?
Yep, she went on like she became like the season's like big bad character because of the tragic loss, so on and so forth.
That's another bury your dead, is either you end up dead or crazy.
Right, yeah. So Panda says, oh, by the way, Rogue Agent's here. Hello, Rogue Agent.
Rob's turn. I want to shout out to Rob. Hey, what's up, Rob?
Oh, Rob, sorry, I didn't see your name. That's
he
awesome.
Snuck in on us under the wire.
Representation is important to me because it gave validation in words to something I didn't have words for but felt my whole life. Growing up in a small town, it was my first contact with the topics. That's super powerful. And like, I know I was just hating in Buffy the Vampire Slayer especially, but I remember this was the early 2000s, watching the show for the first time and seeing LGBTQ plus people together in a time when I wasn't out. Like internally, it was so validating. It was so unbelievably validating. Despite the death, it was still very validating for me.
And it becomes like almost like a secret club, right? Like you and your other queer friends like the show for a very different reason from your straight friends and why they like the show. And so there's like a special relationship that you have with these characters, right? The special depth that you have with these characters that maybe other people don't have, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
There is like an emotional investment that is it's almost scary when you think about it. Like I know like I've even done this with character, like, because let's admit there are many different shows and characters where we know there's something going on. Like the writers are like, these two are together, right? But we don't really like get that verification, but we still like develop that emotional investment in those characters. I see people mentioning Supernatural.
I was like, Supernatural.
Leo's like Supernatural.
Panda. Yep.
And yeah, Supernatural's pretty infamous for killing its gays and killing its women, unfortunately. Although I do appreciate Supernatural, I will say. But see, there's so many different aspects of this topic.
There really is.
See, the bury your dead one that I always think of is Boys Don't Cry. People were like, Boys Don't Cry is a very like progressive, forward-thinking film. Like at the time, people were like, this is really great. It's the first time they show a trans man in a relationship with a woman, and like that he is a boy and that he presents himself as a boy, but they do hunt him down and kill him pretty gruesomely.
That's based on a true story though, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so then you're kind of stuck with, unless you're going to rewrite the story and fictionalize it, and you're kind of stuck with in the parameters of what happened to that human. You know, so I don't know that we could put Boys Don't Cry in that catalog. Like I understand why that would be categorized, you know, in your head, but also it felt like the writers were like, well, you know, this character can't have any kind of, you know, happy ending. It's just like, well, because that person didn't have a happy ending, you know what I mean? And it was more about, to me, that was a different kind of visibility. That was not just a visibility that trans people exist, but that was a visibility of the violence that trans people are subject to
Mm-hmm.
over and above the rest of the world, over and above straight people, over and above even gay people, right? Just any kind of cis person, that trans people are dealing with a special kind of, and I thought they handled it very well and very sensitively, and very, kind of, the multiplicity of different lenses. They were able to
Mm-hmm.
kind of come at it and make it very understandable. So, I understand why you had that in that category, but I would argue that it's kind of in its own category.
Well, like, building off that, if we're looking at things that are based off from true stories, I feel like nowadays there would at least be some sort of like content warning or trigger warning to preface it, right?
Mhm.
Because I think at the end of the day, the reason why we as LGBTQ plus people are really focused on good, meaningful representation is because so many of us have trauma. Like, we have trauma that we've endured, and sometimes seeing certain forms of representation can be triggering, right? Or at least in certain contexts, right? I know, like, for me, and this is based on a true story as well, I watched a kind of like a fictional rendering of the Matthew Shepard murder that took place back in the
Mhm.
90s. And this was a time when like there was like no like content warnings. Like, I was aware of the story, but I didn't realize how visceral and graphic the visual depiction would be. And it
Yeah.
was like really jarring for me. Like, I was just like, oh my goodness, like this is unsettling. But I think now, I mean, if Sherri, if we look at historical context back in like the 90s, for example, like content warnings or trigger warnings weren't really considered, but we've learned so much since then, right? Where
Yeah.
now we can at least give viewers some sort of like hint that, like, hey, this does discuss this specific topic, but it showcases this type of imagery, so on and so forth.
But the Matthew
Yeah.
Shepard case is pretty well known. Like in Boys Don't Cry, I don't think that person's that his story was very widely known as much as Matthew Shepard's was. Like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody knew what happened to Matthew Shepard. So going into a movie about Matthew Shepard, you have to understand that like maybe there's going to be some violence because what happened to him was extremely violent and extremely like, I mean, it was bad. It was, there's no way around it. It was one of the most evil things that you could do to a human being. They did to him.
Right.
Mhm.
Agreed. Let's see. Leo says, I'm torn on a character from Doctor Who. Great
Oh, yeah.
omnisexual and pansexual energy, but representation wise, I don't know. He wants to have sex with any person he meets, basically. See, here, for me, like, I've come to learn myself that, like, that sexual representation almost is on a completely different spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Because one of my biggest pet peeves, especially in the 2000s, was that every gay person was like depicted as being like this voraciously lustful creature, right? To the extent where it spiraled into like being self-destructive. I kind of like went away with that and like ran with it, and I was just like, any sexual representation is horrible, right? But then learned that like, no, it's not. Like, it's a diverse spectrum as well, just like anything else.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if in Doctor Who they might try to develop that further.
I think that's an old one from like David Tennant's run on Doctor Who. But am I right on that? That I think I remember Jack Harkness because I watched a little bit of Doctor Who for a few seasons.
Ooh, I'm so rusty on my Doctor Who. I really need to.
For me, it's still Tom Baker, so I'm really rusty on Doctor Who. I'm talking like
Yes.
Tom Baker, John Pertwee. Now we're talking doctors.
Right.
Um,
Now, don't get me wrong. Like, there are instances where I do still have concerns about like these various tropes.
Mhm.
I know one show that really as much as entertaining as it is, it grinds my gears with regard to at least like the representation of gay relationships and sexual connections. It's shameless. Like, like, and I guess that's the point of the show. Everybody is so self-destructive, but somehow they manage to make things work. But every time I watch it, I'm just like, why aren't there any LGBTQ plus individuals who aren't self-destructive interacting with those who are and cultivating meaningful relationship, But again, though, I could think about it in that like spectrum aspect, like there are many different ways to represent and different accesses on this spectrum. If I'm getting tongue-tied.
It was around the time, because I read a thing on it. It was like around the time Modern Family came out, so like the 2010s ish. There was this move away from over sexualizing, like non-monogamous sex with gay people, and that it was sort of like the whole sexualization of gay people was because there was this mindset of that gay men and women were promiscuous, and that it was around the time of like the AIDS generation, So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like we can see that those narratives were drastically shaped by the cisgender heterosexual creators who were interpreting that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things I actually put in our notes is it's from Media Smarts. They talk about media literacy and like how you critique and interpret media. One of the questions they ask is who created this media text and what is its purpose? Whose voices and interests are being represented? Whose are absent? What are the images and narratives being deployed say about the queer community? And the last question is, if representations in question utilize humor, are queer people in on the joke or are they the joke?
Mm-hmm.
That's so important. That last
Mm-hmm.
question especially is astronomically important.
Mm-hmm. Rob brought up a good point about Jeopardy. Did you see that?
Aside from scripted media, I am definitely appreciating Amy Schneider being a super champ and yes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That is yes.
Remind me again, who's Amy Schneider? I don't know.
Isn't Amy Schneider transgender?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like Amy Schneider is currently the reigning champ on Jeopardy right now.
Oh.
And there has never been has there been a trans person on Jeopardy before?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it. It's possible. I'd probably have to do more research, but yeah, that itself is like it all comes down to visibility, right?
Right.
Like showing LGBTQ plus people living their lives, engaging with the world around them and the people in it. That itself is representation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if there were trans people on Jeopardy, they might not have gotten as far as Amy Schneider, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so that's interesting. We didn't even think about non-scripted media.
Right. Yeah, like game show media, and yeah, that's so interesting.
Reality television.
When you say reality television, I think Real World Seattle. Remember there was a gay character on Real World Seattle. I don't remember what his name was, but I'm pretty sure he was gay. He was Black. There was a big drama between him and another woman who he had slapped her, and there was a big drama. I don't remember it exactly, but I remember something like that happening, and he got kicked off the show, and I was like, oh man,
no. I do love me some good trash reality TV from time to time, but I have to kind of like remove like my over analyticalness from it, because
Yeah.
I overanalyze all the time. That's just what I do.
I totally forgot about Real World New York. There was a gay character or gay person in Real World New York, and he died of AIDS or HIV. He had HIV or AIDS. And that was like a huge story because it was like way back in the early days of Real World. It was like one of the first seasons.
Yeah. My brother followed my brother was positive, and he
Mhm.
followed that story arc. He was
Oh,
very
really?
invested in that character. Yeah.
Mm.
And that was
Oh.
another thing too, right? Having representation of somebody who is positive, but it's normalized to a certain extent, right? I think that was part of the appeal to him was here's a normal person like me, just living their life, right? And doing their thing. And sorry, my crown keeps slipping. Um, and and just kind of living their life, and so even having that kind of representation has been good, and having that kind of normalization has been good in the media.
Oh, agreed, for sure.
Mhm.
Because kind of, I mean, aside from the the sexual stereotypes that we've seen in the 2000s, especially, I think other stereotypes that we see are these LGBTQ plus characters created strictly on the basis of some sort of narrative surrounding trauma itself.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of goes with that, what we were talking about a few minutes ago, oh, there's an LGBTQ plus person. If they're not dying, then they are spiraling or having a
Right.
crisis or becoming a villain, you know. Um,
Mhm. I
being
think,
able to see characters that aren't reduced to some sort of
yeah.
trope is very nice.
And I've often thought that a lot of that came out of, you start to see more gay representation and, queer representation in media, I think more openly in the 70s and 80s. And of course, in the 80s is when we had the AIDS crisis. And so, of course, these two things started to become, kind of intertwined with one another. So you're going to have more of these crisis stories coming out because
Mm.
those were the stories being told. And that was a lot of what was going on. There was a truthfulness to that, for what was going on in the community. And then unfortunately that just became the reality of it. I don't want to equate the two, but of course there are parallels to other marginalized communities. And a Black friend of mine posted online not that long ago. She's like, I'm sick of seeing the trauma of my people being thrown at me. She's like, I know the trauma. I see the trauma. I live the trauma. Can I see some happy stories, please? And I thought, wow, something, think about, but absolutely it's true, right? We saw all of this trauma happening. It was happening to us. You didn't need to tell us the stories. They were our stories. So good. I guess let's tell the straights some of the stories now that they're caught up, right? Can we have some happy stories now? Can we have some happy representation?
Right.
And it's
I'm
taken
glad.
a long time to get there, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I'm just wondering that if maybe those trauma focused stories, maybe that was just the easiest way to begin at least having basic conversations.
Mhm.
If people watch something that is literally reflecting some sort of atrocity happening in reality,
Right.
that, almost the shock value of that at least begins the conversation.
Well, and again, it's about normalization. Like when you have a movie like Philadelphia and you have Tom Hanks, who everybody loves, playing a gay man dying of AIDS,
Mhm.
that's just going to normalize things even more. And it's going to bring this into the public consciousness to where everybody can accept it, right? Rather than it just being swept under the rug.
I don't know. I'm a little bit on this. I understand both sides of the argument, but for me, it feels a little bit like it's catering to a cishet audience, and that it does kind of feel like what you're saying is where are our stories? This is already happening to us. Can we move on and
Mhm.
talk about something else? And
Mhm.
it does feel a little bit like we are catering to a group of people, and they're kind of looking in on the culture and being like, let's scrutinize your culture with a spyglass here.
Yeah. Well, I think it becomes that if that's the only story being told, right?
Mhm.
If those are the only stories
And
being
I and
told.
and I would argue in that first decade of the 2000s, it became so frequent that that's what it seemed like, that was the only story being told. I mean, I know I was talking to one of my friends recently who's a lesbian, and they were talking to me about how the representation of lesbian people has been far greater earlier on than other people in the LGBTQ plus community. But if you look at those examples, like, they're often very sexualized, right? And you can see that it's done so to cater to the male gaze, a very specific audience, right? So yeah, like, I guess the point we're illustrating is that there's a lot of layers to it. Like, there's like a lot of like very fine lines between like good representation, you know, focusing on too much trauma, appealing to certain gazes. Like, it's a very interesting, what is the word I'm trying to think of? A very interesting maze to navigate through. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but it's all I got at this hour.
Second transgender person to appear on Jeopardy. They are the 4 most successful contestants on the show and the most successful woman ever to compete on Jeopardy. Yes!
Wow, that's awesome.
Yes! Sorry, I'm really excited about that.
Thanks for pulling it up for us, Rob. Thanks for checking that out.
Ooh, Arpy brings up a very interesting point. I wish LGBTQ plus characters were played by LGBTQ plus actors.
Let's talk about Brokeback Mountain.
Oh my goodness. Ari, take that away.
So it's played by 2 straight guys who play gay men. And I wonder if, like, it would have been better had there been gay people playing gay people, like how that would have changed. I mean, it's a good movie. It's a good movie. I can't say that it's a bad movie. But how much better would it have been had the actors who played them been gay, because they would have brought a little bit of their own personal history into the role.
I agree. And I also, like, I'm going to play dumb devil's advocate here. I mean, I agree, but then I also understand that making movies is a business. And would it have gotten the viewership that it did if it wasn't for, wait, I get to see Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger kiss? All right, I'm in, right? Like, would it have gotten, you know what I mean, without that name power, without that star power, even though both of them were very much at the beginning of their career, they still already had made a name for themselves. Would it have gotten the traction that it did? And would it have had the same kind of visibility that it did if it had, you know, openly gay actors that maybe weren't as well known? You know, then would it have become another gay movie?
It's true.
You know what I mean?
And during the time, there weren't really big names who were gay people that were around that age. Like, it's usually like either the old gay or like it was just like coming up that there were
this was also the early 2000s too. So people, like, if there were gay actors, like, most of them weren't out enough with it because they would view that as probably a threat to their
or they were playing Jack on Will and Grace. You know what I mean? Like, they were like, oh, you know, like big, loud, and you know what I mean? Like
like this
cartoon characters, you know? So, and I hate to say that, like, another, you know what I mean? But like, you have the gay genre films played by a gay audience played by gay characters for a gay audience. And those tend to not get a lot of traction, and they tend to be played in art houses and, you know, and are French, and you have to read the subtitles, you know, and then you have these big Hollywood blockbusters that are played by straight people or have been up to a certain point. Again, I think we're looking at this in a slideshow, and we're going to say we are working towards that end, right? Hopefully we're working towards that end. And yes, that's where we need to be. That's what we need to work towards, is having these big, you know, because gay people in Hollywood, that's not right. Like, of course there are gay actors, of course there are, you know, and so now let's allow them that space if they wish to play those big gay characters. Like same thing for trans characters. Why don't we have trans people playing trans characters? Especially now that we have some big trans names, right? In the
Right.
community, we have some big performers. Anytime that now I see that, who was it? Who was it? Somebody recently was just like, nah, maybe I won't do that. There was gonna be a role for a trans woman, and it was like, I can't remember who it was. It
Oh,
was gonna
somebody refused the role because
They
they weren't
refused the role.
trans, right?
Yeah, yeah. They were
That's
starting
so
to get,
important.
and it's so important. They were starting to get blowback from, like people were starting to say shit online. And so then that actor, and I can't remember who it was, they're like, nah, you know what? I'm not going to do this. And whatever made them make the right decision, they made the right decision. You know what I mean? And if more actors can do that, then I think the studios will start to kind of cave a little bit. They'll have to, right? To kind of be able to make those movies.
Was that a
Right.
cis man who turned down the role, or was it a cis woman?
This woman turned
Okay.
on the role.
Because I remember there was a movie about a transgender woman, and it was played by a cis man. And
Oh,
it was really weird. It was a weird
ooh, who
movie.
was that? Oh, I know what you're talking about. And Sherri, I also recollect that
Yeah.
across social media as well, what you
I'm gonna-
said.
I'm going to blame cold medicine on my not being able to remember the actor's name.
I just have a bad memory.
I've probably had too
That's
much
why
wine.
I make notes.
Yeah.
So catching up on the comments, because there's been some doozy comments here. Leo says, I think media focuses too much on LGBTQ plus characters' arcs or backstories being associated with traumas. We need to move away from that because it makes straight people think that we're just married. So
ruined.
Or ruined. I think that's a great point. I think it's not necessarily the trauma being present that's the problem. It's how trauma is discussed or resolved that's the problem. I'm going to be a nerd here for a second, Sherri, and then we'll get to what your point is going to be.
No, I was just going to follow up on the actors.
Who was
there were actually two. There was Scarlett Johansson. That's who I was thinking of.
Yes.
But also Halle Berry. She also turned down one. So
I do remember the Scarlett Johansson one especially.
Yeah.
So Leo, I don't necessarily think, I think it's important to have representations of trauma for LGBTQ plus people, but I think that it's important to address it very delicately. I'm going to be a huge nerd right now. So one of my favorite shows is one of the newer Star Trek series, Star Trek Discovery. There are 2 gay men in it, a lesbian, a non-binary character, a transgender character, and a pansexual character. So there's Star Trek went big time with representation. And it takes place in a future where the representation doesn't feel like it's artificial or manufactured. But I got a little concerned about the show for its first 2 seasons because it kind of mishandled trauma a little bit. At least I thought it was. But it was building up to additional seasons where the characters would together work through their trauma and show them successfully living their lives addressing the trauma and navigating it every day. To me, that was phenomenal representation because many of us do have trauma, and we it's important to recognize it in our lives, but it's also important to recognize that we are navigating through it. We are addressing it and navigating it, right? So I think representation with trauma and LGBTQ plus characters is improving gradually. And I think that show is a good example of that. I went off on a tangent. You know me and Star Trek.
Panda had a good comment. Wow, you're right. We have lots of good comments.
I don't watch much scripted TV. Are there ever LGBTQ plus characters today whose primary storyline does not revolve around their sexuality?
Pose.
Star Trek Discovery is another one as well. Yep. These characters, there isn't exact conversation about oh, I am gay and because I'm gay, blah 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 blah. These are just people living their lives in close relationships with one another, navigating life, right? I think it really depends on where you look, for sure.
I want to hear Sherri talk about old gay movies.
Oh, yes.
Well,
Oh,
Panda,
and
I want to give Panda a little shout out there.
that's important. I have another parallel to this in the disabled community. There are disabled and queer actors that probably aren't properly sourced for disabled or queer roles. Yes, 100%.
But also,
Yeah, he continues on.
actors are actors and their job is to pretend to be other people. Some have done it very well. It depends on their talent, but queer talent is underrepresented.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
And then just to power through these final comments, we need more representation that isn't linked to something traumatic. Not every LGBTQ plus character has a tough life. I do think that we do need to see more LGBTQ plus characters who don't have that specific root in trauma, for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sherri, talk about old gay movies.
So let's see. Well, what do you want me to say?
Everything. We are here to learn.
Because you've seen a lot of like queer coded movies, like from way back in like talk about the old, like the really old movies.
So I was raised by a bunch of Stonewall era and just post Stonewall era gay men. So, these were people that were, in their 30s and 20s and stuff when I was just a teenager. I had 30s and 40s even when I was just a teenager. And I mean, they would just tell me their stories, and they would just tell me what it was like growing up. And they were very interested that, my brother had this cis seemingly het sister, who was very interested in the queer community. And I was just a sponge and I just wanted to learn. And I just thought, all these men that dressed up as women, were just glamorous and beautiful. And I just wanted to be one of them. And I was so jealous, that they just looked beautiful. And I mean, I was like 22, I think, before I realized I didn't have to put on so much foundation because I'm not trying to cover up stubble, right? Like drag queens taught me how to put on makeup when I was like 15. So, it's just, I don't know, it's just a different time. And it didn't even occur to me that my upbringing was odd or different in any kind of way until I got to meet, straight people.
The straights.
The straights. So, like, I was taught at a very young age, like, you look for the undercurrent. You first of all, you look for who the director was. You look for who the writers are, right? Are there any gay people in the writing room? Are there any gay actors? And then you look for those performances. You look for those things in their performances. And then you also look for, the storyline itself and the character itself. And so there's just so much, like, I've been given my son a education of old movies, and we were watching an old Marilyn Monroe movie, and he's just like, okay, well, this is, a couple of women and they're all dressed up and they're singing and dancing and is showgirls. He's like, what's gay about this? I'm like, honey, what isn't gay about this? Are you kidding me? I'm like, oh, we got to start from the beginning. I'm so sorry. I started in the middle of this story. I didn't realize. So I don't know. It's just like I was, taught to appreciate old Hollywood and these old grand dames, and their performances. And then here were these, people trying to emulate these grand dames and their performances and, and the elegance and just a little piece of that old Hollywood and a little piece of that glamour and that beauty. And I don't know. It's just a fun time. Oh, I could just reminisce for hours. So,
I love it.
So some of the movies that, I grew up seeing that were contemporaneous to the time when I was, learning about the world are things like Torch Song Trilogy, which you can't even find in media right now. Like, you have to buy the DVD of it. You can't get it on Amazon Prime, or you couldn't find it anywhere to watch digitally. And
I've never heard of that. What's it about?
Oh, it's such a tragedy that nobody's heard of it, right? It's the best least known story. It's Harvey Fierstein's wonderful story that he wrote, based loosely on his own experiences. It was a Broadway play first, then it became a movie. Matthew Broderick's in it right after he did, what was his teen movie? Why can't I think of Ferris Bueller?
Was it? Yeah.
Immediately after he did Ferris Bueller, he did this. So it's hot young Matthew Broderick playing a young gay man. Who doesn't want to see that, right?
Daddy Broderick.
Hello. And it's a torch song, right? So what's a torch song? A torch song are these old crooner songs about how you've been done wrong, or how, you've lost your love to somebody and you're, holding a torch for them. And so it's a story of this drag queen, and it's in 3 acts, so it's a trilogy, right? And she's a torch song singer, and she's a little burlesque because it's Harvey Fierstein, so she's got that whiskey voice like I've got, right? And so she's a little more comical and a little less sexy than some of the other drag queens in the show. And and it's just the story of her life and her loves and her losses, and it's wonderful and it's funny and it's tragic, and it will make you cry and it will make you cheer and you will love it, and everybody in the world needs to see it. Everybody.
Well, you immediately won me over with Matthew Broderick.
I mean, and he is so pretty in this movie. I'm here to
So I wrote it down. Definitely check it out.
Watch. I was shocked when I saw it wasn't on Amazon Prime. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This is like, I mean, it's seriously one of the best movies I've ever seen, hands down.
Mhm.
Anne Bancroft is in it. Mel Brooks' wife. She's in it. She plays his mom. It's just this wonderful cast, this beautiful story. Yeah, it had been a Broadway play, like I said, forever. Like, couldn't believe you can't find it.
Which words are you talking? Are you talking about like when I said Daddy Broderick? I'm just saying.
Let's see, what other movies did I put in the list? I mean, of course, there's The Birdcage, which is beautiful performances. Now, I was familiar with La Cage aux Folles, which was the French version, which came out first, I think, in the 70s. It's essentially the same story. It's just in French with subtitles. And you don't get Robin Williams, so that's a tragedy, right? That's a great movie. Again, Nathan Lane, probably the only gay man, right, in the whole cast, which is kind of tragic, and also playing a little bit of a stereotype. But again, that movie is all about acceptance, right? And it's all about being yourself, and it's all about being loved for who you are. So it has that beautiful message in it too, right? Spoilers if nobody's seen Birdcage, shame on you.
I've seen parts of it. I haven't watched the whole. I haven't literally sat down and watched the whole thing.
Likewise, I've only seen parts too.
Before. What?
I know.
See, Sherri, this is why you're here. Like, you need to like.
Oh my gosh! So Bird, that's your homework.
Assign this homework.
This is your homework. Torch Song Trilogy, Birdcage, The Celluloid Closet. Have you seen The Celluloid Closet?
No, what's that one about?
I've heard of it.
That is the movie you need to start with, because that is the movie about queer representation in movies. And they will take you from the beginning of cinema all the way up to 80s or 90s, whenever this movie was made. And so they will take you up through cinematic history, and it will explain a lot of these characters to you and a lot of these tropes, and it will talk about a lot of the themes and a lot of the issues that you and I and we've all been talking about today. So yes, everybody here, go home, watch Celluloid Closet, crash Amazon. Like, seriously, everybody watch it all together. We'll do a watch party. I'm buying. Mama's buying. Everybody watch it.
Amazon passwords for everyone.
So, Leo brought up Rent. So before I answer this question, we're going to do a part 2 to this show, obviously. And in part 2, we're probably going to talk about like more of our like favorite examples of representation. But I do love Rent dearly. I watched it the other day for like the umpteenth time. But yes, there's trauma and tragedy in it, but it very much focuses on the AIDS crisis, which was so unbelievably important to discuss. So, loves it.
And not just how the AIDS crisis touched just gay men.
Yeah, like right? It's so multi-layered, like,
which was
because
it revolutionary for its time.
Yeah, it did affect a lot of people.
Yeah, I love that movie too. So I watched it, and I just knew it was like this big Broadway blah, and you got to watch it, all this kind of stuff. Nobody had explained to me the storyline before, so I'm watching it, and I was going through a divorce, so I was like a little weepy and a little, weak emotionally. So I'm watching it, and I'm just ugly crying at the end, like snot bubbles, and just like excuse me, it was not cute. So I text my brother. I'm like, what the hell? Why didn't you tell me that this was about the AIDS crisis in New York in the 1980s? my brother, the eternal comic. What did he say back to me? Oh, Rent, it's about the AIDS crisis of the 1980s. Now you're prepared. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, he thought he was funny.
I think I definitely cried the first time.
I sobbed the first time. Now I get like misty eyed. Like I'll get like
Yeah. Well, so then my brother passed away, for those of you who don't know, in 2015. Not necessarily HIV related. He had a heart attack at work. But a friend of mine who's a nurse, and she was becoming a nurse practitioner, and her graduate work that she was doing was she was looking at the correlation between early AIDS drugs, like the early ACT drugs, and men in their 50s and now in their 60s dropping of heart attacks prematurely, because the early AIDS drugs made your body not able to handle cholesterol very well. And so your arteries get extra sticky. So could be some correlation there. So not directly related, but could be related. Anyway, so he passed away. He lived in Toledo at the time. And I went down to settle some of his estate the week after his memorial service and stuff. And I went to visit some of his friends down there, and we went to hang out, and they took me out to the bar, and we all got drunk. Because, it was, hey, this is Sherri's sister. Oh, let me buy you a drink. Yes, please. So, and there was this wonderful bar down there. What was the name of that bar? Brett's $1 mixed drinks. I'm not even kidding you. It's just but still, I'll drink a
Ooh, that sounds dangerous.
$1 mixed drink. I will take it.
Hello. And there was this divine looking, drag queen running the show. And it was just great. Like, it was such a fun time. So we're there, and we're just drinking up a storm. And, my brother's best friend, Will, was like, hey, you need to come. I'm doing a rendition of Rent, blah, blah, blah. You need to come watch it. All right. So I come down the next weekend, and I watch the rendition of Rent. And every anytime Rent is performed live, it's always dedicated to somebody who's passed. And so Will dedicated that to my brother, and I'm already weepy because it's Rent, and I'm already like all emotional. And then he like does the dedication to my brother, and there's like literally nobody else in the stands. It's just he and I were just like ugly crying at each other, and it was just really beautiful.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. That's very poignant.
It's a good memory to have, at least.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. See, this is why representation is important, though, because like it allows us to see that we do have a place, that there is meaning in what we do when we exist, and just the fact that we are existing, right? And it provides empowerment, and we need that. Arpy asks, what about the band played on? Ooh, I don't
remember that one. I don't know that one.
I don't either.
Yeah, I've not seen it either. Looks like I just went to Google it so I could be all cool and know what it was about. It's about the AIDS crisis.
I won't see.
Bye, Leo. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, I've not seen that one either, Arpy. Have you seen it? Do you recommend it to us? Let us know.
Yeah, I'll write it down.
Yeah.
And the band played on.
Do you know what movie that I love is Rocky Horror Picture Show?
I mean,
Rocky Horror Picture Shows now. I'm very
God.
That.
I love that. I love that movie so much.
Hey, everybody comes dressed as a character next week.
Oh gosh. Ooh. Don't tempt
Don't
me.
think I won't. I'll put on my lipstick and do these like really like colorful, like glitter everywhere. Don't think I won't. I'll do it.
Oh my gosh, I'm warm now. Wow, we've had like over 10 people on most of the stream tonight. I'm very impressed. Makes me super happy.
So one thing that you mentioned, Sherri, that is really a good thing is you mentioned about gay bars, and I think I've only ever been to maybe 1 or 2 gay bars. The one that I'm specifically thinking about is Green Spiral in Lansing. I don't think I've been to too many others beyond that, but that was like a dance club.
Mm-hmm. I've been to a few.
There was this bar in Saginaw called Tallulah's, which dates me, by the way.
A little
Named
bit.
after you got it, Tallulah Bankhead. Eventually, they changed the name to Bambi's because this mess named Bambi bought it. But anyway, we're not going to talk about her. In my heart, it was always Tallulah's. And this bar, it was seedy, and it was very much like, and it was in the bad part of town, and it was all those things, and it was wonderful. First time I walked in there, I was 15. They didn't know that. But first time I walked in there with my brother and his friends, and you could feel the veil lift. Like you could feel the veil of, I can now be myself. I can relax. You know what I mean? I don't have to have this face on anymore that I have with the rest of the world. Like you could just feel it in the crowd. And there was a relaxation that happened. And there was a kind of familiarity that everybody had with each other. And there was a friendship, and there was a plausible deniability if you ran into somebody, right, from work, right? There was a kind of, it was like a club that everybody belonged to that was there. And, you know, and we danced and we partied and we just had the best time, and they played the best music, and we would just tell jokes and talk about each other, and we just had the best time. And I didn't go into a straight bar until I was well into my 30s, and that was because I had a friend who was single and she wanted me to be a wingman for her, so I did. And it was so weird. It was like junior high school. All the guys are on one side, all the girls are on another. Nobody's talking. The music sucks, and nobody's dancing. Right? It was like, I don't even know what's
Sounds
going
about
on.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know what's going on here, and I'm scared. Take me home.
We talked about my New Year's. We talked about my New Year's before, and that was definitely a straight bar. Like, they were playing music and nobody was dancing. I'm like, so I get up, and because I am used to like clubs where you go dancing, right. And like, so I was like up there dancing, and like people were giving me weird looks, and people kept saying, "You're so cool, you're so cool." I'm like, you could be cool too, just dance.
Right. It's literally not hard.
Right. If I'm not standing up dancing, I'm at least like in my chair, like with gobs of food in my mouth. Whoa, you know. I remember in Saginaw there used to be a gay club called the Mix that I used to really enjoy.
Miss the Mix.
Yeah. That was a fun time. I do remember the Spiral I remember going to Spiral as well. Especially goth night. Chef's kiss.
So when did you go to the Mix then? Because our paths may have crossed.
It was when did the Mix close? I'm trying to remember.
That's a good question.
I think it was between like 2008 and 2012.
We had to have crossed paths.
I'd be surprised if we didn't. Like,
we had to have, because we were there all the time.
Yeah.
And usually we were causing trouble.
Yeah, I was usually there getting into trouble.
I'm sure that's true. So the Mix, for those of you all didn't know, it was an old bank. And so it was in two halves. One half was kind of little sit-down spots, and there was a little bar, and there was a pool table, and you could it was a little quieter, and they were doing karaoke. And then on the other side was the dance floor. And it was really beautiful. It was all neoclassical, and he'd repainted it all. So it had all this faux marbling up the walls with these great ionic columns. And it was just really gorgeous and faux marble panels. And they had a DJ in there. And for New Year's, they'd always have a drag show as well, which was tons of fun. We always did New Year's there every year. From the time it opened until the time it closed, we always did New Year's there. And it was such a, you'll pardon the expression, drag when it clossed. Because it's like, where do we go now? Like,
yeah,
it was straight bar.
It was a very huge loss to the community, I think.
It was a huge loss to the community. I don't even know why it closed. Well, I do kind of.
Oh, it's probably because I was busy getting into trouble.
Chasing boys.
Or being chased, because that's how I operated.
Yeah.
For a while, at
Probably.
least. I was always like...
I do remember a bar that I would go to when I lived in Florida briefly. There was a lesbian sports bar near my house. And I kind of like, I had this little hope that if I went there, like, that I might get picked up by a really hot chick. And I was severely disappointed. No
Oh.
one wanted to hit on me because they're like, who's this straight girl?
Oh,
Aw.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Well, my friends, I definitely think we need to pick up this topic, like, and continue it for sure, because it's so unbelievably important. There's a lot more to unpack and discuss.
Mhm.
But do either of you have any parting words for the evening?
Y'all have your homework. I gave you your homework. I expect it by next week.
Yes.
I'm here. I'm queer. Watch movies.
Both of those are perfect. I'm just going to end with that. So, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. If you've not subscribed to my channel, Sherri's channel, and Ari's channel, please go check them out. You can see them down in the description section of the video. Click on like. If you are watching this after the stream and you want to comment, please comment, because we do read those comments and respond to them. So we love you all. Have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Love you.
Bye.